Thank you for joining us today for this webinar, our mini-STEMposium to support teachers in the field. This is the second of 18 webinars we are hosting. This session has 482 participants registered. My name is Ken Heydrich, and I am the National STEM Manager for Accelerate Learning. I'll be your host today for an incredible afternoon of learning. I've been in K-16 education for over 30 years, and connecting with educators in the field like today is the best part of my day. Thank you for being here. We have lined up some exceptional talent from around the country for these mini-STEMposiums. This week we are offering 6 sessions during the afternoon. We will also host 6 sessions during June 16 through 18 and July 14 through 16. The link to the schedule is found in the chat window. Some of our national superstars include Peter McLaren, who just concluded, Roger Bybee, Oki Lee, Larry Plank, David Crother, Rita McDonald, and Kelly Price Colley. We also have some local trailblazers from the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including Shane Woods, Linda Cook, and Malachi Eubank. In addition, we also have some of our best presenters from Accelerate Learning, including Pam O'Brien, who's presenting today. As you know, these are challenging times. Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes want to support our hardworking educators by offering these sessions of high-quality professional learning. Nothing in return. We are just trying to provide some meaningful professional experiences free. We are trying to take your mind off the pandemic for a moment. Please note that the participation of our major invited speakers does not necessarily mean an endorsement of products developed by Accelerate Learning. The speakers, along with me and my colleagues, are here to provide a rich learning experience so that teachers can take back with them some useful information and strategies to their students. We are all in this together. Before we begin, let me share some procedural aspects to this webinar. As you know, we are using Zoom, which has a number of interactive features. Please look at your sound and video controls found on the bottom left side of your screen. The sound should be muted. We also recommend that you use the speaker view on your video display found in the top right corner. And let's try one feature now called polling. Let me release a quick poll to see who we have participating today. You should see the poll now. If you will go ahead and mark your background. About 75% of you have voted. About 10 more seconds. Okay, let me close. 3, 2, 1, and let me share the results with you. Who do we have in the field today participating in this engineering webinar? It looks like a lot of teachers, but primarily the middle school teachers, 6 through 8, 37% of them, of the participants are middle school teachers. And we also do have some campus and district administrators. That's great. Thank you for participating in that quick poll. Let's talk about chat. We will be using the chat function today for your comments and questions. This window is being monitored by STEMscope staff, and they will be able to respond when necessary. We will also be using a Zoom function called breakout rooms. Our presenter will be able to randomly put people into smaller rooms for discussion. Okay, that's it for the procedures. So today, we are fortunate to have Pam O'Brien from Richmond, Virginia, present. Pam is an exceptional presenter at statewide, regional, and local events. I've seen her present many times, and she is truly outstanding. She is a lifelong learner with over 25 years in education. She began her career as a classroom teacher in Denver, Colorado. She moved to Richmond, Virginia, and became a staff member of the Math Science Innovation Center. And she currently travels the country as a regional STEM coach, presenting and working with schools. So we're very fortunate to have Pam share her expertise and her insights with us today. So Pam, take it away.
Thank you, Ken. Hello, everyone. It is a pleasure to be here with you this afternoon and a privilege to be part of this mini-STEMposium. We will start our time this afternoon looking at some different scenarios and identifying whether they represent a complete engineering project or not. We will then walk through an engineering design challenge, taking time to reflect on specific student actions after each of the steps. Next, we want to give you some time in small groups to reflect on incorporating the engineering design process into your own environment, whatever that may be. And finally, we will have a brief discussion about where this type of process may fit in a distance learning environment. So let's get started. Take a look at the puzzle on the screen for a moment. I will give you a minute or two to think on the answer. How many additional blocks are required to make the cube whole? Assume the hidden inside cubes are there. There is no need to respond. Just think on this for a few moments.
This group is great at following directions, Pam. I think they're thinking really hard.
Thank you. So for me, puzzles like this represent a challenge. The answer is not always obvious, and I may have to take some time to think on it for a while. Sometimes I may need to create a model to help find the answer. Sometimes I may need someone else to solve it. Sometimes I may have to return to a problem after some time away. So these puzzles, they bring out the skills and the practices that we want to instill in our students. Creative thinking, persistence, perhaps collaboration. These are also skills and practices that are brought out within the engineering design process. So we're going to return to this puzzle at the end of our session. But for now, let's begin. To get us thinking about what engineering is, I have a series of scenarios for you. On your Zoom control panel, you have a reaction button. For each of the scenarios that appear on the screen, please use the thumbs up reaction if you think it is a complete engineering problem. If you don't think it's a complete problem, you don't have to answer. But if you think it is a complete engineering problem, go ahead and use the thumbs up feature. Here's the first scenario. Scenario 1. A group of elementary students plans and implements a recycling program to reduce waste at their school. Jessica, do we have some responses at this point?
So there are a couple thumbs up. Let's see, scrolling through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. About 8 thumbs up on the participants that are showing their videos. And
Okay.
Let's see if we can look at, and then a couple more in the, yeah, about 8 of them.
Thank you. So this is engineering because it requires a process involving idea generation, implementation, and some possible revisions in order to solve an authentic problem for the betterment of humans. Let's try the next one. Scenario 2. A company realizes there isn't a product on the market to effectively clean air ducts in houses over 25 years old. They design and create a product to begin selling. What do we think about this? Once again, use the reaction key for your response.
And the reaction key is located on the button that's close to your share screen, and it has a smiley face on it. You could also click yes in participants. Or some people are giving some answers in the chat. Some say thumbs down. And then I don't see very many thumbs ups.
Okay, this actually is engineering because it demonstrates a process, once again, to solve an authentic real-world problem. In this case, effectively cleaning air ducts in homes. The problem does impact humans. The process does include identifying a problem, planning a solution, as well as implementing it.
And we did get some thumbs up as soon as, right before you started saying yes, we got some thumbs up. Good job, guys.
Things to just get us thinking this afternoon. Okay, how about scenario 3? A nonprofit organization is interested in cataloging all of the bird species in a specific neighborhood. The members spend 6 months and collect this data. They share the data on their organization's website.
So far, 1 thumbs down, no, down, down. We got at least 4 thumbs down and a couple of thumbs up.
So as presented, this is not engineering because it appears that it is only data collection and dissemination. As a result, it would be considered a scientific study, but not necessarily an engineering challenge. How about this next one? Construction workers use their equipment to install new power lines in a new housing development.
At least 6 thumbs down, 2 thumbs up, maybe even, lots of rolling in. I like this participation. Looks like mainly thumbs down.
So this is not engineering. Though the construction workers may use engineered plans to install the power lines, their role is to build or construct. So it is part of the engineering process, but it is not a complete project. They were not engaged in the process of the planning or the reviewing, just the installation. And one last one. A farmer needs to get water from a distant river to her crop fields. She plans out a system to divert water from the river using a series of ditches or sprayers.
At least 15 up and one maybe. Oh, that's a good one.
Maybe is always a good answer.
Yeah.
So this is engineering because there is a problem to be solved, and the farmer is required to figure out a plan, implement it, and possibly troubleshoot to solve the problem of getting water from the river to her crop fields. So we can see from those scenarios that engineering identifies an authentic problem to be solved. That is going to involve an idea generation. It's going to involve implementation of those ideas. And then once it is tested, it might have to be revised or retested. So when we bring this into our classroom with the engineering design process, what we are looking to do as teachers or educators is to make authentic links to the content. We want to shift the instructional focus and see the interconnectedness of multiple content areas. This is where we really want to get into that STEM education. And we want to create meaningful and authentic classroom experiences. So how do we do that? How can we create meaningful and authentic classroom experiences using the engineering design process? Today, we are going to walk through an engineering design process. In this environment, we will not be able to fully participate in each step, so our focus today is going to be a bit different. After a brief description of each step, I'm going to pause and give you time to reflect on and share what the students are doing. We're looking for specific student actions at each of the steps. What practices are they incorporating? What skills are they using? We're going to walk through this process as if we had our students face to face. But we know that's not the case at the present moment. So I want you to kind of, in the back of your mind, think about, as you're watching this, think about how you would do this face-to-face. But what possible modifications could you make if you were to do it virtually? We will speak more directly to distance learning later in the presentation. So first, let's meet the team. When our students work together collaboratively, we want to be intentional about the way the groups or teams are structured. We want to make sure each person on the team has the opportunity to contribute to the process in a meaningful way. Assigning roles to each member of the team is a way that we can help to ensure that. For this particular design, these were the roles that I chose. First off, we have our team facilitator. This person is going to keep our team on track. They're going to encourage communication among the other team members. They're not necessarily the leader who does all the work, but they're the person who guides the process. We also have our mechanical engineer. This is going to be the person that helps the team to understand the scientific principles behind the prototype or the model that they build within the challenge. We also need an architect. This person is going to develop a blueprint with input from the other members. They're going to keep track of the design changes, and they're going to make sure that the prototype or the model follows the design. And finally, we have our materials manager. This person is going to be in charge of obtaining the materials and overseeing the correct use of the materials for the build. So the other thing we want to consider is the method by which we put our teams together. As a teacher, do you assign the roles? Do you allow the students to choose? Do you assign them randomly? Perhaps you want to schedule a time to meet with each team members so that they truly understand the role that they bring to the team. Now that we've met the team, let's move on to the challenge itself. Meet Guy Curry. He is an 11-year-old skateboarding phenom from Brazil. Like most 11-year-olds, he has not been in school for a while due to the quarantine. He has taken that extra time to take advantage, and he has set a world record. This young man performs and lands what's called a 1080, or a 1080-degree turn. That's 3 full rotations. Let's watch him in action. So what this boy has done has never been accomplished before, not by any skateboarder in history. And at 11 years old, he landed this trick with some extra time off due to the global pandemic. So that's just maybe a small silver lining. He performed this trick on something called a half pipe. And so today we're going to create a half pipe of our own. We are not going to create an actual size structure. Each team is going to create a smaller model of that half pipe. And I want to talk a little bit about some of those criteria that will be needed. So the structure is going to need to allow an object to roll down one side and up another and land in a cup. No additional force will be added, and that object, once it lands in the cup, needs to stay there. So as we begin looking at this engineering design process, the first thing we want to do is define the problem. So this involves identifying that criteria or the standard by which the design can be measured. and the constraints, any limitations or restrictions. So one way to accomplish this is to present the teams with a written form of the challenge and have them pick out the criteria and the constraints on their own. And that is certainly a way to bring in a nice ELA tie to your science classroom. You may also want to do this as a whole group discussion with criteria and constraints that are listed for the entire class to see. So whatever works in your environment, whether you have the students pick out the criteria and constraints from a written challenge, or whether you discuss it as a whole group and write them on the board, is fine. For today, I have gone out and written them on the board for us after our discussion. So we decided as a team that our criteria was that the object should travel down one side of the half pipe and up the other side. The object must land and stay in the target cup. The model may be any size. The model may be attached to and or supported by outside materials. And as far as the constraints, we can only use materials provided for the structure itself. The marble can only be released with no additional force. And we will need to complete each stage of the design in the time allotted. So at this point, I want to pause for a moment. And I want to think about the student. I want you to think about and reflect on the student actions that would have taken place during this time. So at this point, I want to bring up a poll. And what I'd like you to do is follow the directions at the top of the screen. Go to www.menti.com and use the code 349406. And
sorry, Pam, we did put the login, the code into the chat message.
Excellent, okay. And so once you have logged in, you have the opportunity to put one or two words or short phrases that you think describe the student actions during this define the problem piece of the engineering design challenge. I'd also like to say, probably more important for your own personal process, if you don't want to log into this, that's absolutely fine. If you just have a piece of paper next to you and you want to be writing down some of those words, that works as well. But I really like to see all the words that are being put on our wall right now. We have collaboration, brainstorming, discussion, asking questions, planning, conversation.
This is always fascinating to watch how this transforms itself.
It always reminds me too that many heads are better than one.
And so you can see where, if you're looking at Pam's screen, you can see the discussion happening where people are putting discussions in. But like when I was on my phone here, I couldn't see the actual results on my phone. But Pam was saying things like, I see lots of big words. The bigger ones are usually the ones that are being put in the most often. Is that right, Pam?
That is correct.
So like discussion and collaboration and brainstorming. A lot of people are saying those things.
Ah, I like controlled chaos.
That's a good one.
out of the box thinking.
We have another one in the chat, prediction.
Mm-hmm. Give it just a couple more seconds to put in your thoughts. Once again, though, if this isn't something that you're participating with the group, as long as you are making a list off to the side on your own, that is a great way to process as well. Okay, looks like we've come to a stopping point with our entries. So thank you for that. Just taking a look at what we have here, some of our bigger words: collaboration, brainstorming, discussion, planning, critical thinking, asking questions. We also have research, teamwork, delegation. So think about those words and think about what these represent, what these represent as student actions, and think about what we want our students to be doing in our science classroom. Do you see some words up here that resonate with you?
One person in the chat said active listening.
I like that. We're going to go ahead and leave this for now and come back to our next step. Let's brainstorm. So at this time, the team is going to think about any and all ideas for a solution to the problem. This is also an excellent opportunity to build necessary content knowledge and experience the teams may need for the challenge. At times, an engineering design challenge could be presented at the end of a science unit, sort of as a culminating project or assessment. In that case, many of the concepts and the activities from the unit can be a reference for the challenge. But at other times, another way to look at this is that the challenge could be introduced at the beginning of the unit. And as the students work through the science content in subsequent days, they can refer back to the challenge that they will be doing. Either way, it forms a strong connection between the science content and the practices. Here are a few examples of resources that could help students gain the necessary background information. With our particular challenge that we are looking at today, an important science concept is gravitational potential energy. So we may want our students to conduct an investigation around this concept. We may want them to do some reading in a science text. We may want to introduce them to the concept through videos or interactive simulations. So once we brainstormed, we want our teams to come up with a plan. This step includes identifying materials that are available, discussing possible models, and then agreeing on one, as well as creating a drawing for that plan. I like this intentional planning stage for those thoughtful processors out there that want to take some time to think about or plan out what they're going to do. So we have our materials manager who's going to be in charge of our materials for today. We have pipe insulation. We have small cups, scissors, tape, and a marble. Our mechanical engineer is then going to lead a discussion with the team about how these materials tie back to the scientific principles explored during the brainstorm phase. So once again, this will be a conversation about, let's look at these materials, let's think about what that challenge is. So what did we learn earlier that might help us with this challenge? What was the content that we learned that may help us to put together a working model? And then the team facilitator is going to lead a discussion on possible prototypes or models. Once again, that person is not going to come up with the idea all by themselves, but lead a discussion as to possible different models that we could use. And then of course, our architectural engineer is going to create a sketch based on the input of all. So this team initially thought, based on the criteria and constraints that were given to them, that they would take their insulated pipe and they would attach one end of it to a table. And then they would attach the other end to a chair. At the top of that chair, they would put the cup. As they would roll the marble down, it would roll down one side and up the other, and hopefully land in the cup. This was their initial thinking. And a pretty good plan.
Yes, definitely a great plan, Pam. So some great discussion going on in the chat room. And one question said, do you feel it is important to share the available materials before the kids plan? What are your thoughts on that?
So I do think that it is. And so I'm going to go back one. That's why I liked that the materials manager was the first person to be introduced in this planning piece. And so just to clarify, I would have the materials manager come and take all available materials and then bring them back to the group. I have tried it the other way, where the materials manager describes the materials, and it's just the adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words and the actual object's probably worth 1,000,000. I would put the expectation on the groups, though, that they didn't actually start to build, but that they did have the materials in front of them as they put together a plan.
And Pam, would you ever maybe scaffold and let the kids have a few options for materials to choose from?
Absolutely. The 3 cups that you see in front of you here, those are actually 3 different options for using a cup. So the smallest one would be the hardest or the largest challenge. You may want to start with the bigger, shallower cup. And once they reach that goal, you could add a different cup. You wouldn't have to use a marble per se. You could use any kind of, object that rolled. The pipe insulation or a pool noodle does work well. Yes, I think being creative in the materials and allowing students to have different choices is also a great option.
Thank you, Pam.
Any other questions at this point?
Just one about a rubric and when you would introduce those rubrics. And I think we might talk about that later, but I'll let you decide.
Thank you. So once again, I want to take you back to our survey, and I want you to think about the student actions that are happening at that brainstorm and plan phase. Brainstorm, gathering all ideas for possible solutions and maybe possibly conducting some research. Planning, finding out what materials you may need, making a drawing, and then kind of deciding what was going to be the best plan for you. So I'm going to come back here, and I'm going to go to the next question. Brainstorm and plan. What kind of specific student actions do you see happening there?
So in the chat, they're saying things like prior knowledge and collaboration, just like here on our Menti.
Mm-hmm.
Measurement, synthesizing others' information. And just other great conversations going on there.
Looks like the big ones coming out of this would be collaboration again, communication, critical thinking, modeling, discussion. We also see draw a model, estimating, teamwork. Lots of great responses.
Another one, debate. Uh-huh.
So at this point, the moment that everyone has been waiting for, now that we have defined the problem and done some brainstorming, sketched out an initial plan, it's time to build, test, and redesign if necessary. So the first step is going to involve using any materials and following your plan to create the model. Then your team's going to want to test that solution and see how you solve the problem. And based on the outcome of the test, your team may need to go back and do some redesigning of that model, making either large or small changes to the original design. And so one thing we want to encourage with our students at this point is that they may need to go back and modify. So they want to fail fast to succeed sooner. And what I mean by that is we want to build and test and then go back and retest if necessary. So they've had the opportunity to make a plan and they've had an opportunity to kind of think through that and discuss that. So now let's build. And sometimes I know for people like myself, we get a little lost in the details and the minutia and we strive for perfection. And right now what we're looking for is a model. Let's build a model so that we can either test it to see that it works or perhaps go back and make some modifications. And either way is great. This would also be the time if you were to put a time constraint on them to let them know. And that's really going to be based on your personal preference, what you think about your students. You know, what do you think that they'll be able to, who can find success within, you know, a certain amount of time, also given whatever time constraints that you might have in your environment. So here's the model that our team created. So you can see that they've attached one end of the pipe insulation to the table. And as part of their discussion early on, they wanted the other end to be lower than the start. And the reason they wanted that is because one of the constraints was that the marble wasn't going to have any force applied to it. And so they didn't think it would make it all the way back up the other side of the ramp. And then they found a way to attach the end of the insulation to the cup. And so this was their prototype. And here's a little behind the scenes look at to what that test and retest might have looked like.
They're loving this, and they said, I love the phrase, fail, test, succeed sooner.
Way to go, Pam.
Woohoo!
There you go. Just a little behind the scenes look at what you do when you're in quarantine. So And so because we didn't follow the original model, we had our architectural engineer go back and make some modifications to the original plan. And what we found is that although we had the top of the chair was still lower than the table, we needed to lower the end of that ramp even more. So by spinning the chair around so that we were using the seat of the chair instead of the back of the chair, we were able to find success, as well as moving that chair a little bit, making some slight modifications with the placement of the chair. So once again, we're going to go back to our poll and take a look at our student actions. So in that test and that build, test, and redesign, what did we see our students doing?
Make adjustments, critical thinking, failing and redesigning, improving, evaluating. Their chats are just rolling in.
Okay, we see testing, problem solving, revising, adjusting, evaluating, analyzing, test and revise, creative thinking.
Another one said trial and error in the chat, observing carefully.
Learning from mistakes, adjusting model. All great responses. And that brings us to the final phase, which is to share and critique. This is going to involve presenting how you solve the problem and discussing the strengths and the weaknesses of everyone's solution. So equipping teams with a rubric, either at the beginning of the build or at the time they are preparing for their presentation, allows for equitable assessment from group to group. It allows the teams to understand what the expectations are, and it also gives them an opportunity to ask if they are unclear about any of those expectations. It also takes the focus off the overall success of the model and evaluates more the process the teams went through as a whole. And in addition, it promotes many of those 21st century skills such as collaboration, communication, and presentation, among others. So in answer to a question that was asked in the chat a little bit earlier, I think that it is your decision. I have seen rubrics presented to students at the beginning before they begin, or presented at this point when they're preparing for their presentation. And so whichever one seems to work the best for your situation, but definitely providing them with something so that they know what they're being assessed on. And the last one, when we share and critique, what are those specific student actions?
They say in the chat, excitement, improvements needed, active listening, revising, encouragement, interaction, accomplishment and feedback, active listening. Also explaining, learn from failure.
I see building confidence, feedback, reflection, communication, constructive criticism.
And another one, positive comparison.
This is also a great time during the phase to help students understand how to talk to one another, how to give feedback, how to dialogue with other students appropriately.
And while it is not necessarily part of the process, one thing that I very much like to do with the students is give them a time for self-reflection. Collaboration, cooperation, teamwork, they're all really important skills. I do think at some point in time, it is also good to just sit and reflect in your own thoughts about the process and answer some questions kind of on your own. So these questions could be different at each time, but these were the examples that I had for this particular process. Did everyone equally participate? Was everyone's ideas considered equally? What was the innovation or your innovation? And what would you do differently this time? So for those of us who have done engineering design challenges for a while, we know that they're very engaging. They capture the attention of our students. They just are a lot of fun. But I want to shift our conversation just a bit and talk about why it is so important in today's science classroom. So in 2011, the framework for K-12 science education was published, and it represented a very important first step toward the new science standards in this country. So from the framework, the actual doing of science or engineering can also pique students' curiosity, capture their interest, and motivate their continued study. The insights thus gained help them recognize that the work of scientists and engineers is a creative endeavor, one that has deeply affected the world they live in. So included in this framework was what we have come to know as the science and engineering practices. They are one of the 3 foundational components of the next generation science standards. And although not all states have adopted next generation science standards, most states have moved toward incorporating science and engineering practices into their science content. So here are the words of the science and engineering practices. Do you recognize any of those words from our surveys?
They love the graphic. And use, construct. Another one in the chat says language.
So once again, thinking about the idea that by incorporating the engineering design process into your classroom, you are covering the science and engineering practices. it is certainly the engineering design process is not the only way to address the science and engineering practices in the classroom, but it certainly is an engaging and effective one. So in addition to the science and engineering practices, we also have the student capacity in English and language arts, or ELA, and the math practices. And so go ahead and take a look at those. Taking a broader STEM look. Do you see some other student actions from the engineering design process that are noted here?
Oh, constructing explanations, the value of evidence, revising, evaluating, reasoning, critiquing. Oh, using appropriate math tools.
And then just to further illustrate the power of integrating the math, the science, and the ELA, here we see that there are some practices that are inhabited just in science and just in math and just in ELA, but there are many that have overlaps in all three disciplines, creating a true STEM environment. So this is the model of the engineering design process that we followed today. There are other models out there as well. Here are just a few. This is from Engineering is Elementary. This is from teachengineering.org out of the University of Colorado at Boulder. And this design process is from NASA. So we see that there are some differences among these processes, but there are many, many similarities, all leading us to the end goal of authentic, meaningful classroom experiences that incorporate the practices of sciences and engineers with the content. So this has been a lot of listening on your end, and I very much appreciate that. We want to take some time now. This is your turn. We're going to move into breakout groups. And what I'd like you to do when you're there is I'd like you to think of science content that you currently teach. What kind of design challenge could you incorporate into that content?
Okay,
So
Pam, we can have 40 rooms with 4 to 5 participants in each room. Will that work?
that sounds great.
And how long would you like them to be in the room?
Let's say 7 minutes.
7 minutes. Okay, folks, I'm going to invite you to a room. If you will please go, and you can have your dialogue with your new group members. Okay, the 30-second timer went out. Everybody should be coming back in. Pam, are you there?
I'm here. I need to take myself off mute.
Excellent.
You know. Okay, for those back in the main room, can you see my screen? Are we back there?
We see you.
Okay.
You share your screen again.
There we go. How about now?
Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you had some nice discussion in there. I know that was not a long time, but we also know that we are nearing the end of the day and didn't want to keep you for a long time in there. And so there we go. There it is. So I want to talk just a little bit right now about this process and what it would look like in a virtual environment. And I'm really talking to you teacher to teacher at this point in terms of how do we brave this new world that we have found ourselves for the last several months. And just a few thoughts on that as we look at education in general, but engineering design process in particular. We want to think about, are we making it engaging for our students? And I think one thing with the engineering design process is that it is engaging. I have never issued a challenge to a group of students and not had them just really want to tackle that. So I think that's something to think about if it's possible for them to work on projects like this, you know, in a different type of environment. There may be some of the steps that may not be feasible in a distance learning environment, but there may be some that are. And then also knowing that we have scaled back somewhat and we're really looking for the biggest bang for our buck as far as what we give to our students. We want to make sure that it's purposeful. Does it really hit a particular science standard that we're covering? Is it something that could cover multiple standards? And then probably the biggest question, and of course the one that we're all grappling with, is it accessible? And that's going to be different depending on each district, each school, wanting to make sure that we provide accessibility for all our students and what that may look like. And I think that conversation is just going to need to continue as we move forward into next year. And so I know when our students encounter challenges and we encounter challenges, perhaps when we venture into uncharted territory, we make mistakes. Sometimes we do something wrong. And sometimes we might actually fail. But as Carolyn Dweck reminds us in her wonderful book, Mindset, failure is nothing more than a chance to revise your strategy. Thomas Edison says, I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And Sir Winston Churchill gave us one of my all-time favorite quotes: continuous effort, not strength or intelligence, is the key to unlocking our potential. And so may we take this attitude into our classrooms, whatever it may look like, and we take this and we turn it into this. And now back to our puzzle. We have come to close to the end of our time together. So is there anyone out there who would like to throw up an answer in the chat? How many additional blocks are required to make the cube whole?
Several of them are saying 20. Some a few numbers above, like 24, 45. 2 times 3 equals 6. I'm really hoping it's 20.
So 20 is a really popular guess. It was also my first attempt in solving this. And if you were to take 20 cubes, you would fill in the structure. But you have to look at the word cube and understand that a cube has all the same sides.
And a question, does it need to be a solid?
Yes.
Define whole. Somebody
So
said 5x4.
So if you added 20 blocks, it would make a 5x4 structure, 5x5x4. So to make a cube that was 5x5x5, we would need to add another layer, adding 25 more blocks for an answer of 45.
And you got an ah.
I will also tell you that I got an answer from an English teacher, and he told me that he could make one block out of wood and it would fit into that to make the cube. And I thought, well, brilliant. And you know what? That's what it's all about, isn't it? Arguing from evidence. Show me a different point of view and convince me that your way is right. So that's another reason why I like these puzzles so much. We are coming near the time of our session to draw to an end. This is a resource folder that I put together for you. What we have in here are, there are the cards from the first couple questions that I asked you. Those are actually from an activity called Is It Engineering or Not? And so we've included a set of cards in the folder. There is also a set of cards with the different steps of the engineering design process that we walked through. And then I've also collected a couple of resources. It is by no means an exhaustive list, but just some resources on the engineering design process, and also some resources on how to tackle engineering design in a virtual environment. So that is yours to peruse. And at this point, I want to thank you for your participation and your time and your attention. And I'm going to turn it back over to Ken.
Wow, thank you, Pam. That was wonderful. You shared a lot of relative insights into incorporating engineering that will engage and help our students. You also modeled the engineering process clearly for us. Thank you again. To follow up, we will now post a certificate of participation into the chat window. You can take that link and you will go get a PDF of the document, and you can then print it out for your principal or your school district. We will also post a short 5-question survey about this webinar. This webinar has been recorded and will be available on the mini-STEMposium website next week, along with a PDF of the slides that Pam shared today. Please remember that we have additional webinars this week and a set of 6 in June and 6 in July. You are welcome to go online and register for those. So on behalf of Accelerate Learning and STEM Scopes, we appreciate you taking time to participate in these learning experiences. Thank you and be safe.